If I wanted to destroy a nation, if I wanted to destroy America, you know what I would do? I would provoke them as best as I could to forget thinking about things that really matter. I'd do as much as I could to make the people of a nation I'm trying to erode, I would try to make them vain and stupid and easily manipulated and controlled. That's kind of exactly what's happening, isn't it? We have a constant news cycle that is trying to grab our attention to go one direction or another, and it's just obnoxious. And if you're not paying attention to the news, because maybe that's too much reality for you, what do? You turn on TikTok, you turn on Instagram, you turn to other media sources. And what I would try to do if I wanted to destroy a people is get them to ignore things that have depth and meaning and value, and try to get them to focus on stupid things like people's stories that don't matter. I would try to get them to focus on, the latest dance craze. I would try to get them to watch the latest video, the latest show, the latest movie. I would try to distract them from all that really matters, try to convince them that there's nothing important they need to pay attention to over here, and show them shiny, pretty new things over here. That's exactly what's happening to us. You come to Isaiah chapter 5, and you see the redundant nature of sin put on display. Israel has fallen into the same trap, albeit 3,000 years ago, that we are currently falling into today. They have become a vain people who are preoccupied with money and with fun and parties, and they don't want to pay attention to God. We actually looked at how the effort is to ignore God. How can I just, I don't want to hear what he has to say. I'm going to avoid going to church. I'm going to avoid anyone who's going to repeat the things that he has to say. And I'm going to shut out that voice. Now what we move to is the next stage. This is the second way that you can destroy a nation. And that is, instead of just ignoring God, now you move to the stage of forgetting God. You ignore something long enough, you start to forget about it. You start to ignore your own past and the things that you've done in your past, and then eventually you start to forget about it. I mean, not completely, but you do move on to forgetting many of the details of what has happened. Isaiah chapter 5, verse 11, you get the second woe from Isaiah. He says, "Woe to those who rise early in the morning that they may pursue strong drink, who stay up late in the evening that wine may inflame them. Their banquets are accompanied by lyre and harp and by tambourine and flute and by wine, but they do not pay attention to the deeds of the Lord, nor do they consider the work of his hands." I have a hard time not seeing a whole large segment of American society, of Western society, caught up in this indictment. Woe to those who rise early in the morning that they may pursue strong drink. They live for the party. Their whole life is the party. You probably have coworkers where the whole goal is to get to the weekend so they can get drunk, so they can enjoy the next couple of days getting plastered and coming back around and get back to Monday and hating life and hope to make it through to Friday. The goal is to have an endless party. For what end? To what end? He says here further, those who would, not only do they rise early in the morning that they can go after strong drink, but also who stay up late in the evening that wine may inflame them. If you've ever been around many drunks, you know exactly how inflaming alcohol is to the system, how most of your fail videos on YouTube have alcohol involved. Most of the fights that break out have alcohol involved. Ask a police officer. It's amazing how much alcohol does to inflame problems and provoke issues. And yet, we continue to pursue it. Why? We want to forget, it would seem. We want to forget something, some things that have happened in our lives. We want to ignore them somehow. He says in verse 12, their banquets are accompanied by lyre and harp, and by tambourine and flute and by wine. So what we have now is these aren't poor drunks. These are wealthy drunks. They have plenty of money. They're able to have live entertainment, able to have a good time on the grandest scale. But notice the conclusion here. But they do not pay attention to the deeds of the Lord, nor do they consider the work of his hands. They're having such a good time that what actually matters in life is given no thought. Why? Why think about that stuff? Why think about the hard things in life? Why think about the fact that I have a creator that I have to answer to? Why bother? If I'm a Jew of this time, I've already worked to ignore God, to shut the law out, shut the prophets out, get that out of my view. And so I've made that happen. Now what do I do? Now how can I just shut him out? I continue down the road. And one of the best ways to silence God is to use drugs and alcohol to try to numb the mind and freeze the heart so that you don't think. I don't really want to think. I want to avoid that topic. I want to avoid those things. I want to avoid the thoughts of God. Verse 13 then comes the stark reality. They've been having a good time. They've been able to ignore God for a season. And they've been able to push even further to forget him. But the bill comes due. Verse 13. Therefore, my people go into exile. Why? For the lack of knowledge. They don't even realize the infractions, the sins that they've multiplied because they don't know the law. They don't recognize all of the ways they're provoking the God of holiness, the Holy One of Israel, to anger. It doesn't register anymore because they don't know him. They've spent so much time ignoring him and forgetting him, avoiding those realities, that when judgment starts to come, when the Lord starts dealing with them, they don't see any connection. They go into exile because God told them this would happen. Isn't that awful? If you have a sweet child that you love so much and you tell them, son, daughter, don't do this or it will bring this consequence. And then they go out and do it. And you're not delighted at all to tell them I told you so. But in some ways you must. You must say, my child, I tried to tell you this would happen. I tried to tell you to listen. You wouldn't hear it. You didn't want to listen. You didn't want to hear what I had to say. The people of Israel are going to go into exile decades from now, from this time. They will go into exile because they don't know God and what he has to say. It's interesting that the plea from Moses back when he was receiving the Ten Commandments was, God, let me know you and let me know your law so that I can honor you, so I can please you with my life. This is the people who have done the exact opposite of Moses. Like, I just want to forget you. I want to ignore you. I want you out of my life. But they're a covenant people, so they don't get that option. And God has said, if you do thus, if you multiply these sins before me, I will bring judgment. And it says in verse 13, and their honorable men are famished, and their multitude is parched with thirst. You see the irony there, right? This section that we started with is talking about a group of drunks, basically. The heroes are those who can drink the most wine. But now what do they end up with? Thirst. The drunks end up thirsty. In the previous section, you had the land hungry end up food hungry. It doesn't matter how much land you accumulate, you're going to end up starving. It doesn't matter how much you end up getting drunk, you're going to end up thirsty. And now, maybe now, you'll think. Maybe now you'll consider God and his ways when judgment comes. He says in verse 14, going further with the explanation of judgment. He says, therefore, Sheol, the grave, death, has enlarged its throat and opened its mouth without measure. And Jerusalem's splendor, her multitude, her den of revelry, and the jubilant within her descend into it. Now here you get this visual aid. Illustrations sometimes break through where normal discourse will not. Sometimes an illustration is able to shine the light on a situation. You go, oh, that's what you're trying to say. What he's trying to say is here, look, you're going to have such a good time in your constant thirst, your constant lust for more. You're going to have such a good time. You're going to forget about God. You're going to be having a party all the way into the grave. You will be swallowed up by the only appetite bigger than your own, death. See, because you can hide as long as you want, but eventually death comes, and you can't get away from that one. So the whole party, like if the whole ballroom is here and you've got all these people having a good old time and getting plastered and, and all the den of revelry, everything that goes along with that. They're having so much fun, they don't even really realize that their whole party room is falling, descending down into the grave. Death. So Jerusalem's splendor descend down into the grave. Verse 15, so the common man will be humbled, and the man of importance abased. The common man's going to be brought low, and the man of importance the same. The eyes of the proud will also be abased. The eyes usually give away where you're really at, what you're really thinking, how you really think of yourself. And the eyes of the proud will be abased. But the Lord of hosts will be exalted in judgment, and the holy God will show himself holy in righteousness. Hell and judgment glorify God. And this people that wanted to ignore God and forget him will find they can't run fast enough or far enough away. They'll find that there's no safety. There's nowhere to go. And God is not embarrassed about that. I find that interesting. One of the easiest ways to know where somebody really is at in their understanding of God and judgment is to ask them what they think of hell. And do they think hell is an actual place, a literal place of judgment where God's going to deal with sin and sinners? Or have they kind of massaged it in some way? See, God's not embarrassed of this reality. The fact that he will bring judgment on this people who don't want anything to do with him and who have breached their covenant with him, that doesn't embarrass God at all. In fact, what it will do is glorify him. It'll prove that he is a God who cares about righteousness, who cares about sin being dealt with. In his own definition of who he is, he explains, go back to Exodus 34. When God wants to reveal his glory, he reveals his character, his name to Moses, and he tells him exactly what he is. He's kind, loving, compassionate, gracious, forgiving, but he will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. He will deal with sin. And this people who would love to defy God and live for their own glory will find in the end, despite their best efforts, they'll end up being something that is used to glorify God. Will you glorify him because of your obedience to him, your willingness to follow in his way, or will you end up being used to glorify him as God reveals his righteous judgment? You can't escape that reality. Israel at this time wanted to forget that reality. There was no escape. But we can learn wonderful lessons from this, and we can wake up to the reality of God. I hope you've been encouraged. I hope you've been inspired to live for God all over again as we walk through this little section of Scripture. Thank you for joining me.